For the first time since the war broke out in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sat down with the Israeli media where he said that he is ready for a partial deal with Hamas to return some hostages, and further outlined that the intense fighting in Gaza's Rafah city is coming to an end. To talk more on this, we're now being joined by Mr. Alex Tremin, CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief of Jewish News Syndicate. He's joining us live from Jerusalem. Thank you so much for taking our time and joining us here on WION, Mr. Tremin.
Thank you for having me.
For starters, how do you assess the latest statement by Netanyahu, where he's clearly said that he's ready for a partial deal to get the hostages back, but not a complete ceasefire?
I think it's consistent with the statements that he's made since the first hostage release several months back. He said that he's willing to make tactical pauses, even extensive tactical pauses, but that the goal of the war must remain intact, which is to defeat Hamas, to remove it as a political entity and a military entity. So while he'd be willing to do a pause in order to bring hostages back, he's not willing to fully end the war. Although I think if there was a good deal on the table for all of the hostages in one fell swoop, that perhaps he might be willing to budge on his position.
Right, Mr. Tremin, just to follow up, despite growing global condemnation that Netanyahu faces, not just from its allies, but also from Israel, from his own people. Just a few days ago, we saw the Israeli war cabinet being dissolved by Netanyahu. And despite all of this, he's still adamant to eliminate Hamas. And like you mentioned, he's not agreeing for a complete ceasefire, which is in tandem to all the statements that he has made so far. What do you think is Netanyahu's post-Gaza plan, and why is he still so staunch and adamant on eliminating Hamas?
Well, I think that even Netanyahu's opponents who left the war cabinet didn't do it over the question of whether or not Hamas must be removed as an entity. They all agree. In fact, all Israelis would agree with Netanyahu on the question of war policy. Netanyahu has been a polarizing character here in Israel, and Israelis are hopeful that those that oppose him are hopeful that they could perhaps get to an election sooner than later. And that's why Gantz and Eisenkot, who were Netanyahu's opponents, left the war cabinet. But it doesn't mean that they would be pursuing the war in any other way different than the way Netanyahu is pursuing it.
All right, but the Israeli war cabinet clearly said that they are not in tandem with Netanyahu's post-war plan in Gaza, because there is no post-war plan for Gaza at this moment. And at some point of time, the Israeli defense minister or the Israeli war cabinet member, Benny Gantz, he said that Netanyahu is stopping Israel from a complete victory. How do you assess these statements?
Well, Netanyahu has been clear that Hamas is not going to rule the Gaza Strip on the day after. He's also been clear that the Palestinian Authority, which incentivizes the murder of Jews and throughout Judea and Samaria, is not going to lead the Gaza Strip on the day after as well. So the question is who? And Netanyahu, in his interview last night, specified that Israel is going to be inside the Gaza Strip for a long time and is going to retain military control there. And on the civilian administration level, that they were going to be working with local Palestinians as well as hopefully other regional actors, which might include the Emirates and Bahrain and even Saudi Arabia, perhaps, to help rebuild Gaza Strip on the day after. But I think that that's the main difference there between Gantz and Netanyahu, is that Gantz and others might be willing to let the Palestinian Authority in on the day after, and Netanyahu's been adamant that that's not going to happen.
There's also growing protest against Netanyahu on his latest statements, wherein he said that he's only agreeing for a partial deal. Do you think Netanyahu's latest comments have caused tremendous damage to the chances of reaching any kind of a ceasefire deal?
I don't think so. Ultimately, Hamas has rejected deal after deal in the last several months, and it's very easy to pin the blame on Netanyahu, who's an elected official leading a democracy. But you're dealing with a terror organization which took the hostages to begin with. They don't really have any incentive to release all the hostages at this point. They've made that abundantly clear. There's been months and months of negotiations, and you haven't gotten anything. And in part, the reason why you're not seeing a release of additional hostages is because because international community is putting so much pressure on Israel to stop. If the international community was putting all of the pressure on Hamas and telling Israel that they had a free hand to remove Hamas from power, then you might see Hamas trade hostages in exchange for better conditions. So really, I think that a lot of the criticism of Netanyahu is misplaced. If you want to see a ceasefire fast, all the pressure should be going on Hamas, not the other way around.
Right, Mr. Treman, but earlier when the six-phase ceasefire deal was put up, which was outlined by the U.S. President Joe Biden, Hamas said that it is positive and will consider it very positively. But it was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu who had issues because the six-phase out ceasefire plan did not mention the elimination of Hamas. What do you have to say on that?
I mean, if you look at Antony Blinken's statements when they presented that plan, they said that it was a plan that was approved by Israel's war cabinet, including Netanyahu. And they took it to Hamas, and ultimately it was Hamas that didn't approve that plan. So it's very easy to take a plan that Blinken said was approved by Netanyahu and Israel and the war cabinet, and then to turn around later and say that it was Netanyahu that scuttled the deal. That's not the case.
All right, my last question to you, Mr. Treman. This latest statement by Netanyahu that we've also been discussing for the past few minutes, it comes at a time as Israel is increasingly facing flare-ups and cross-border fire with Lebanon's Hezbollah militants. How do you assess that?
Well, since October 8th, Hezbollah has been firing at Israel. A recent count showed that Hezbollah has fired close to 19,000 Katyusha rockets, anti-tank guided missiles, drones at Israeli territory for months. And Israel's has evacuated over 80,000 of its residents from northern Israeli communities in order to get them out of harm's way as Hezbollah has continued to attack Israeli towns and cities near the border. The last several weeks, the intensification, the escalation of these attacks, and Netanyahu has made it clear that as the more intensive phase of the war in Rafah will wind down in the coming weeks, so you're going to see Israel move more of its troops, more of its tanks, more of its missile defense to the north as Israel prepares for a full-scale conflict with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon.
Right, Mr. Treman, thank you so much for taking our time and joining us here on WION with your insights.
Thanks for having me.